Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I am going to be talking about my worst books of 2021. Now, you probably heard me say quite a bit recently that 2021 was not a great reading year for me. I didn't have very many 5 stars at all. So I guess you could assume that I have a whole ton of really bad books to talk about, but I actually don't. 2021 was just very, very average in all ways, really. Like, it's just a nothing year. I actually think it's worse than 2020. Like, I had a worse time in 2021 than I did in 2020, which is wild to me. But I don't have any 1 stars to talk about this year. There's nothing that I absolutely hated. I do have a whole ton of DNFs, which is unusual for me because I'm normally try not to DNF, but I think I have almost 10 books that I DNF'd in 2021, and so I am going to be making a video, I think you'll see it next week, that has all of the books that I did not finish in 2021. So this video won't include any of those. So what I have for you guys today is kind of a video in 2 parts. I only have 9 books to talk about in total. 3 of those books are books that I gave 3 stars to, so I didn't hate them, it's just they disappointed me a lot for whatever reason. And the other 6 books I'm going to be talking about are the books that I gave 2 stars that I liked the least, because I think I had 11 2-star ratings in total, but some of them I just don't really care enough about. They've just kind of evaporated from my mind that I couldn't even be bothered to talk about them in this video. But we're going to start off with the books that disappointed me, because I do usually make a most disappointing books of the year video and I've decided not to this year. But the first one of those is At Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. So 2021 was the year that I finally discovered like standard adult contemporary romance, and I think the thing that kicked it off was this trilogy. So I loved Chloe Brown and I loved Danny Brown, gave them both 5 stars, was obsessed with them, thought they were amazing. One of them is going to be in my best books of the year, which will be coming very soon, and I really expected the same from Eve Brown. So this is the final book in the Brown Sisters series. Each book follows one of the sisters and Eve is the youngest. She's very flighty. Her family see her as irresponsible. Her older sisters have successful careers and know what they want to do with their life, and Eve really doesn't. She just flits between things. So they actually come from a very well-off family, and her family have told her that she needs to go and stick to something because they're going to cut her off, as the family money that they are provided is there to kind of get them on their feet and support them a little bit, with the idea that eventually they're going to make it on their own. So they decide to cut Eve off and she drives off. She's very emotional. She drives off to the Lake District and sees a job advertised at this B&B for a chef. So she goes in to apply for it. She really doesn't get on with the guy who owns the B&B because, as I said, she flits between things and he's very much like about rules and order. And so when they discover that they really don't get on, she leaves and accidentally runs him over, which means that she has to run the B&B for a while because he can't. I think he's broken his arm. The romance in here is between those two, and there is autism rep in this book as well. But the reason why I didn't like this one is that I just didn't gel with Eve as much. I think your preferences when you're reading the series really just depends on which sister you enjoy the most, like which one you identify with the most, and Eve just wasn't the sister for me. In terms of the love interest as well, I would say that Jacob is also my least favorite love interest, so I didn't get on too well with him, and I just didn't feel the chemistry between Eve and Jacob like I had in the other books in the series. Like, the romance in this series is on point, like it's fiery, it's tangible, you can feel the chemistry in these books, but Eve didn't really do it for me. So I still enjoyed it because it still had things about the rest of the series that I loved. It was still really funny and it still had the same tone that I'd fallen in love with in the other 2 books, but Eve was definitely my least favorite of the series, and I did not foresee myself giving this less than, I want to say less than 4 stars. I gave it 3. I thought it was a guaranteed 5-star read for me, but apparently not. The second of my disappointing reads was Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 2nd book in his young adult sci-fi, which I can't remember what this series is called. I think the fans have kind of named the series and it's the series name that Brandon Sanderson is going with. But in Skyward, we are following a girl called Spencer who wants nothing more to join a flight academy on the planet where she lives. However, she can't do that because her father was actually a deserter from the same like flight army platoon, regiment, whatever you want to call it. And so her family has been outcast because of this. She's looked down upon, like her family can't even have real jobs because of what her father did. But Spencer doesn't actually believe that her father was a deserter because she can't think of any reason why he would do that, and she very much wants to follow in his footsteps minus the alleged desertion. The main critique that I hear about this series is that Spencer is a very irritating character, and she absolutely is, but I think that she has really good character growth throughout the first book to the point where I ended up loving her by the end of the first book. So I was really excited to go into Starsight. I think this might have been a 5-star prediction for me, but this is just a rehash of the first book. So we start to build like a nice found family in the first book. There's some camaraderie I really appreciate. I really gelled with the characters of the first book, and in this we pretty much follow the same plot and the same growth for Spencer in a new place with a different set of characters. So I found that to be really tedious to read through, and I don't understand why the end of this is the end of this. It just takes a turn that I really did not expect, and I don't know why it wasn't included at the beginning of the next book in the series. Now, the reviews of the third book in this series I've heard is that it kind of does the same thing again, which I'm not a big fan of. I'm hoping that I really like the third book in this series to give me continued hope throughout. But yeah, I was really disappointed by this because when I finished Skyward, my opinion was that it could only go up from here after Brandon Sanderson had done all of this character development and made Spencer like a more likable character and someone I could really relate to. I thought we were kind of going to carry on progressing, but we kind of just did the same thing all over again. And the final book that falls into more disappointing than bad is Among Thieves by MJ Kuhn. Now, this isn't a sequel or anything, so it was disappointing for different reasons than the first two, but this one is an adult fantasy heist story that follows a girl who's the butcher of Carrowick, and it's very clear at the beginning of the book that she's running away from something in her past, and she has joined this crime gang called the Saints as like a mercenary or assassin figure to just fly under the radar and keep running from her past. However, one day she finds out about this impossible job, and she thinks that if she manages to complete this job, she will earn her freedom. So she recruits a few people from the Saints, so like a smuggling captain, a nobleman's son with quick fingers, and also a master of disguises to help her out. So I love me a heist story. I love following like an assassin or mercenary figure, and I was just really excited about this one because with assassins and stuff, you tend to get a little bit of a dark story as well, and I love my dark, bloody, gory fantasy. However, my main issue with this book is that it's just really short. It's like 300 and something pages. It is very plot driven and very fast paced, which is not my preference, so I probably wouldn't have liked it anyway, but that is fine. Like, books do exist like that where you're just mainly following the plot, but it also tried to do things with the characters that I just really feel like it didn't have a chance of pulling off because the book is far too short. So it tries to build like found family elements, and it tries to deliver shocking betrayals. However, I can't believe the betrayal when I've never had a reason to believe that the character would behave in a different way. An example is like if a character is betraying another character, you have to feel like there's some level of trust there. Like, you have to trust this character that is going to be betraying another character. But when there's not enough room in the book for character development that really builds that trust, the betrayals just can't really hit. There were elements about this I liked. I liked the heist story. I liked the setting of this. I liked the characters, even though they lacked development, so I kind of liked the ideas of the characters. It was just far too short and far too fast-paced for me to enjoy. That being said, I think if you do really like fun, fast, plot-driven stories, you may enjoy this one a little bit more than I did. So moving on to the books that I just genuinely didn't really like, this one kind of could be a crossover into the disappointing category, and that is Witch Shadow by Susan Dennard. So this is the fourth core book in the Witchland series, and in that series we are following a young girl called Safi who is a truth witch, which means that she has the ability to sense when people are lying. This is obviously a coveted ability, so Safi has been hiding, like nobody knows that she is a truth witch apart from the people closest to her. All of that changes when one day she stumbles across a blood witch who has the power to sense someone's blood and then track them over miles, and from that moment she is on the run with her best friend Iseult, trying to evade this blood witch and being taken and used as a pawn by like a whole ton of people. Now, that is not actually what the series is about, and that is my problem with this series as a whole. Witch Shadow was just kind of like the final nail in the coffin for of this series for me. The real plot of the series is more about the origins of the magic and some really old magic in the world, and also a 20-year-old treaty between all of the kingdoms that is about to come to a close. So my issues with this series as a whole, before we get into this book specifically, is that it has the pacing and the writing style of a young adult fantasy, but the complexity of an adult fantasy, and the two just don't quite mesh together because the pace is constantly moving and there is a lot going on in this plot. So you don't really get time to understand it because it just kind of flits between points and flits between character perspectives. There is a quote that runs throughout this series, and I can't remember what it is word for word, but it's something about like distracting somebody while somebody else cuts the purse. So in terms of Safi and Izyul, Safi I think distracts them while Izyul cuts the purse, or the other way around, and that is, they've been thieving for quite some time essentially. And I believe that that is an undercurrent for this entire series. So Susan Dennard is distracting us while other things are going on in the background, which sounds really clever in concept, but it just does not make an enjoyable series to read because the side characters are actually carrying the plot of this series in the background while all of the main characters are just dicking about essentially. So the only plot line, the only motivation that any of the characters have in this series, even 4 books in, is I'm running away from something, I'm chasing somebody, or I'm trying to find somebody. So they're just all running around the map, and we have quite an extensive map in here while side characters are actually dealing with the main plot in the background. This book in particular, what I wanted from it is, after having the characters separated for so long, because everybody's just running around here, there and everywhere, I wanted them to come together in this book and iron out what they were going to do for the last book in this series, when, fingers crossed, the main cast actually cotton on to the fact that there's a plot going on in here and become part of it, so that we had like a solid groundwork established for entering into the last book in the series when everything's going to come together. However, that just didn't happen, and I know there's been publishing issues with the series as well. So this, I think, was technically meant to be the 5th book. I don't know whether Susan Dennard intended to have an extra book in here or whether she just wanted this one to be much longer, but there's a big time jump at the beginning of this. So the last book ends on a point where something's about to happen, and then this just cuts like a massive amount of time to way after those events, and I feel like what happened in this book is a lot less interesting than the stuff that happened in the place where we don't have a book that told us what happened. So I think that that was an interesting choice, and it's just nothing is coming together in this series, at least to the degree that I would like it to. And the sad thing is that the actual plot that's going on, figuring that out and trying to figure out what's going on, is interesting to me. It's just I want to follow that plot line, and like I know that Susan Dennard is trying to do this clever thing where she distracts the reader while other things are going on, but I don't care about these people running around the map doing nothing interesting. I care about the actual plot of the book. I feel like I should clarify at this point that these aren't in any particular order now that we're going through the 2 stars, because I don't think I hate one any more than the other. But the next one I'm going to be talking about is Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline. I did make a full non-spoilery review about this. There are very light spoilers in there and like running on assumptions of like what happened at the end of book 1 if you haven't read it and just wanted to watch that review. But this was a sequel to Ready Player 1, which I think was my favorite, or it was definitely up there in my top favorites of 2018. I absolutely loved it. As somebody who is a gamer, as somebody who really loves the 80s as like an era with like all the cool hair and the good music, I didn't feel like Ready Player 1 needed a sequel. I believe that this was kind of announced off the back of the movie, but I figured I would read it because even though it didn't need a sequel, it could still be an enjoyable read. And there were elements of it that I enjoyed, but it just very much felt not necessarily fan servicey, but it was very clearly an addition to something that didn't need an addition. So the plot of Ready Player 1 is that we're following this guy called Wade Watts in this near apocalyptic future where the world is just a terrible place to be. So all of the inhabitants plug in to this online virtual reality called the Oasis, and the creator of the Oasis, James Halliday, has passed away a number of years before the start of the story, but he has left an Easter egg hunt within the Oasis, and the first person to complete it will inherit James Halliday's estate and the control of the Oasis. So it has been years and nobody has discovered anything about the Oasis until our main character Wade Watts stumbles across the first Easter egg, and then it becomes a race to see who can solve all of the clues first. This just felt like Ernest Cline dropping in all of the clever things that he could think of that don't exist into a book. So essentially a lot of the characters in this book now are incredibly rich. So it was just going through like all of the technology that they'd all invented to make the world a better place, and how you could have like sexual interactions within the Oasis with this new technology that they'd discovered, and how Wade was like so open-minded about gender and sexuality because of all of these virtual experiences he's had. And the majority of this wasn't actually relevant to the story in any way, so it did just feel like a info dump of like, look at all these cool things that I've imagined. I did like the actual plot when we got into it. I think it took about 150, maybe 200 pages to kick into the second Easter egg hunt that started within the plot of this book, and I did enjoy that because that really appeals to the gamer in me with this nature of like questing and all of that kind of stuff. But I felt like the areas that we focused on, like it got a little bit tedious. So one element of the quest would take like 50 pages and the next one would be like half a chapter, and then we'd have another long one, and it was full of like really obscure informations about the particular areas of pop culture that it was looking at in this. One of the areas is centered around John Hughes movies, and it had lots of obscure references and stuff in there. But then some of the real world elements didn't make any sense. Like one of the main characters is English, and they were looking into the past of this character. They said that she was a senior in high school when she did this certain thing, and that she was 18 years old. But if you are in the UK, like it's you finish school when you're 16. So it was elements like that that were poorly researched as well. There were a couple of plot holes. I didn't think it was well done, and I didn't think it was necessary. That's all I can remember off the top of my head, but I mean, I made a full like 20-minute review video on this, so if you are interested, then be sure to check that out. Next up, we have a couple of indie romances, the first one being Denim Vipers by K.A. Knight. This one is an adult romance about this girl called Roxy who falls in with this gang of vipers, and it's a reverse harem. So she just, you know, like it's just smut. It's pure smut with all of the members of this gang. Now, this has got a lot of hype. I think it was TikTok that brought this about, but it has things like knife play in it, and it's real kind of extreme. There's like elements of degradation within the smut in here, dubious consent, all of that kind of stuff. And I like myself a dark romance, so I thought I would give it a try, and I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. Not really because of the smut in here. Like, knife play isn't my thing, and I've never read knife play before, so I found that to be a little bit bizarre as something that I'd never encountered before. But my actual issue with it was that it was just really long and really boring. So it has a very weak plot to start off with that I don't even remember at this point. But after the plot resolves, the book goes on for like another 100 pages afterwards, which is just a series of smut scenes. And some of the smut was good. Like, I enjoyed some of the smut. Each of the different vipers has a different kink and a different relationship with the main character. Like, one of them is the sweeter one of them's into like all of the real kinky stuff and the knife play and stuff. One of them develops like a dom sub relationship with the main character. My favorite viper, because I do have one, is Ryder, and that is the one with like the more dom sub kind of relationship. And I also liked, I think, is it Kenzo, who's Ryder's brother? But it just got to be too much because it was just like a series of smutty scenes with very little plot linking them together, especially when we got to the end and then there was 100 pages of literally just like wall-to-wall smut. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend reading this one. If you're curious, I mean, sure, give it a go, but if you start to get bored, I would just give up because nothing really happens at a certain point. Like, when you're past a certain point, it's literally just smut, and when the smut's not exciting you anymore, if you're not interested in that anymore, there's very little point continuing this one. The second of the indie romances was Barbarian Alien by Ruby Dixon. This is the second book in the Ice Planet Barbarian series. I saw this series like quite a while ago and was like, wow, that's bizarre. I'd heard like middling things about it, so I decided to give it a go, and I think I tried to read, was it in 36 hours? I tried to read as many as I could, and I managed to read the first two and a novella before I gave up because I was just not having a good time. The Ice Planet Barbarian series is about this group of women who end up on this spaceship. They're abducted by aliens. Content one is for sexual assault, not within the romance or as much of the series I read, but with this first alien abduction. And then after they're abducted by these aliens, they get stranded on this planet and they head out looking for survival, and they encounter this colony of like massive blue dudes. And then every romance, as far as I'm aware, is between one of these big blue alien dudes and one of these female human survivors. So I didn't really know what to expect. I'd heard that the smut was decent. It was a little bit bizarre, so I was like, cool, let's give it a try. The first book I gave 3 stars to was because it was kind of a novelty thing. I was like, you know what, I don't love it, but it was entertaining. But then when I moved on to the second one, I realized that it was just essentially the same thing again with a different alien and a different human woman. So I like kind of noped my way out of there and gave this one 2 stars. There's a couple of things I can't really get behind, especially as it's repeated throughout the series. One is that it had like a repeated theme of taking an unconscious woman to a cave and then stripping her naked. And then the second one is that I believe the entirety of the series is breeding kink, and that is just really, that's just not for me. It's really not for me. I can read the odd novel, like if it was just the first one, fine, but I'm not sure how much into the series it goes, but from what I've heard, that is like the main theme of the series. So alas, I will not be continuing the Ice Planet Barbarian series. Next up, we have a thriller that I read, which was Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Knoll. This is about a girl who went to this like prestigious school and something terrible happened to there and people want to know what happened. She has a first-hand account and they're trying to get her to give it. So I think she's getting married and somebody wants to make a documentary on her before she gets married that covers the wedding and also this terrible thing that happened at the school. So I was intrigued because you don't find out what happens. You're following the character in the present day timeline as she's preparing for the wedding and this documentary is being made and stuff, and she's gone back to the town where this school is and she's resolving some issues. And you're also following the past timeline in a linear way where like she went to this school and everything that led up to this big event that we don't know. I was intrigued about what happened, and I think that it did a good job of like keeping the intrigue up throughout the book. But the main character in here is insufferable. She is privileged, she's entitled, she's just not a likable person in either the past timeline or the present timeline, which when we talk about thrillers is fine. I can read about characters like that when they serve a purpose. But my issue with this book is that when I found out what this big thing is that happened, it actually has nothing to do with this main character. She just happened to be there at the time. So I was then annoyed that I had to read all of these hundreds of pages following this insufferable character only to find out that she's only relevant because she was there and she didn't actually have anything to do with the thing that went on. She just happened to be there at the time that it happened. So yeah, I didn't enjoy this one. I am open to reading more from Jessica Knoll though, because it was a decent reading experience, and I think I listened to the audiobook of this because in terms of like thrillers it is quite a slow one. And the final book I'm going to be talking about today is Nerve by Jan Ryan, which is a young adult tech sci-fi that follows this online game of dares, and our main character is, she's kind of like the quiet, mousy girl, and her best friend is the one who like is beautiful and gets all of the attention. So to push herself outside of her comfort zone, the main character enters this game of dares, and it starts off real small. Like I think her first dare is that she has to go into a coffee shop, pour a glass of ice water over her and say cold water makes me hot, and you have to have somebody record it and submit it. And then as you play the game, the runners of the game offer you more and more enticing prizes to complete more and more high-risk dares. So I wasn't expecting a whole ton from this. I wasn't expecting to be blown away, but the one thing that I did kind of want from it is for it to be a little bit thrilling, you know? It's like a sci-fi thriller essentially. But my main issues with this was, one, the prizes didn't seem all that enticing, and two, the dares didn't seem all that high risk. I mean, they do get there. Even towards the end as we got to the final dares, I'm still not even sure whether it was like a real situation or like an orchestrated one where nobody was actually in any danger. And my main issue with the dares actually is that they weren't necessarily high risk, they were just really sleazy, considering that we are following a main character who's 17 years old. So the whole thing with this first dare, which happens really early into the book, is when she pours this cup of ice water over her, she's wearing like a thin silk shirt and her top goes completely see-through, and this video is posted on the internet for like thousands upon thousands of people of undisclosed ages to see. And then there are more sordid dares after that, so that just put a bad taste in my mouth. And then, like I said, the one thing that I wanted from it was for it to be a little bit exciting and a little bit thrilling, and it just really didn't deliver on that for me. I did keep turning turning the pages, but in kind of a like, I can't believe this is happening kind of way, as opposed to I like want to keep going because these characters are in such a high risk situation. I was like fascinated that this is what was unfolding in the book, but I wasn't compelled in like a normal kind of way, if that makes sense. So there you have it. Those are my 9 worst books of 2021. Nothing to particularly rant about this year, just a couple of things that left me feeling a bit dissatisfied really. And do stay tuned if you're interested in seeing my best books of the year, because that will be the video on my channel that directly follows this one. But down in my comments, please let me know what your guys' worst book of 2021 is. Do you hate it as well? Like, do you hate it with a burning passion, or is it just one that, you know, didn't do it for you? And aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Kindle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.